evening's conversation, restoring truth, privacy, and mental health on social media, really sits at the intersection of technology, power, and democracy. And I think, as we all know, social media has really transformed our ability to connect. It's transformed how we consume information, but it has also become, as a result of a handful of decisions by a few companies, it has become a breeding ground for misinformation, engines of surveillance, and spaces where harassment, deepfakes, and addictive design features are taking a shocking toll on mental health. But today we are joined by a really remarkable group of leaders who are confronting these challenges from very different angles, from legal advocacy to investigative journalism, from documentary filmmaking to media leadership, private litigation, and direct action. But this isn't just a conversation about social media. It's a conversation about how we restore trust, we reclaim privacy, and we protect our democracies and our well-being in the society we now live in. So, first off, just to introduce myself, my name is Ava Lee, and I lead People vs. Big Tech, which is a European movement fighting for a better tech future. And we are joined by a really incredible panel. So I have to my left, Lizzie O'Shea, the co-founder and chair of Digital Rights Watch. Lizzie is a lawyer and leading advocate for digital civil liberties, working at the intersection between technology, power, and democracy. We also have Deirdre Veldin, the president of News Media Europe and former group managing director of the Irish Times. We then have, to my right, Ashley St. Clair, a writer and public figure who has become a powerful voice in the debate over AI accountability. And Art Kulik and Ashton Bingham, who are the founders of Trilogy Media, and they have built a really large following by exposing scammers and cybercriminal networks. Okay, so to kick off, I think all of us know a lot about the harms that we see from social media, but maybe just briefly to kind of set the stage, would you give us just a very short answer of what you see personally as one of the key harms in 2026 on social media and how it's impacting society? And Ashley, let's start with you.
That's such a loaded question on how social media and the internet is harming society. I think we have, especially as it relates to what's true and what's not true, misinformation and the aggregation of these harmful things online. We have never seen such scale. And that is, to me, the largest issue is the economic incentives attached to these algorithms which produce this harmful content. And it boosts it because there is economic incentives in being emotionally volatile. Unfortunately, nuance does not drive engagement. Being compassionate does not drive engagement. What drives engagement and subsequently profits is emotional volatility. And it's these teenagers and young people and people who are vulnerable in our communities that are then being thrown into these emotionally volatile algorithms for profit. And they have no recourse. And that, to me, is what we need to do. We need to zoom out and see the structure as opposed to going after individual users and saying, you posted something that's not true or harmful or whatever. We need to go back to the product because that's what they've created is a product in the algorithm that needs to be held accountable for harming society at large. There is no other industry, whether it's in weapons or pharmaceuticals, that has such a lack of transparency, and we need to see what's going on under the hood.
Thanks, Ashley. And Lizzie, I know a lot of your work has looked at the systemic nature of this issue. How are you seeing that play out today?
So I would agree with Ashley. I think there's obviously very negative problems associated with the way these products are designed. They're designed for engagement rather than meaningful social connection, which has an impact on your own personal health, but it also has an impact on the democracy structures that we rely on. What I would say as well is part of this stems from the immense concentration of economic power in a very small number of companies, because they are then put in a privileged position of being able to influence democratic processes in a way that many voters would not necessarily support, but don't feel they've got the possibility to challenge. And so it poses that threat to our democracy from outside the actual online experience, which I think is important to remember. These companies spend hundreds of millions of dollars lobbying in places like the United States, but even somewhere in Australia where I'm from, there's a very considered effort to shape all regulatory frameworks to suit their own interests. And that can include consolidating their own competitive position as against others who are challengers in the marketplace. And, you know, this has got a long history. Antitrust and competition legislation has a long history of not just being about regulating markets, but also protecting democracy from the concentration of economic power. And that's something I think that we need to reclaim. So understanding the harm as something that's experienced personally, that might be experienced by our community, by spaces that are designed to not facilitate democratic discussions or navigate difference and find common values is one important component of it. But remembering also that our economy is ultimately becoming extremely dependent on these companies, which then strengthens their capacity to influence regulations in ways that don't suit the majority of people and don't prioritize their interests. And that's obviously particularly true as we move into the age of artificial intelligence, where some of those competitive advantages gained during the social media era are now being consolidated in the context of developing AI products and economies that are dependent on them.
Thanks, Lizzie. Deirdre, do you want to build on that, the idea of kind of unfettered power and the impact that is having on media and journalism?
Yeah, so I suppose in addition to the harms that we can see manifestly for ourselves every day that have been spoken about, if we look at media, one of the side effects of the great power now being held by social networks is that media faces extinction, traditional media as we know it. And you know, if you think back to what are the origins of media, to hold up a light to society and politics, and to be one of the fundamental organs of state and of democracy, and what we're seeing is that being eroded now by the great power that can be attributed to the social media networks and platforms. I think one of the key issues here is around the issue of both transparency, as Ashley has said, and of attribution and of taking responsibility. So at the moment we have power and profit, indeed, without responsibility being taken. And whether it is a case of being able to view social media networks as publishers or as having a particular and special type of responsibility in carrying the content that they carry as platforms, and in the design of those platforms, you can look at it whatever way you like, but the responsibility is not ingrained in it at the moment. It is not integrated, and that's something that we really need to try and force in.
Yeah, thanks so much. That's definitely something that keeps me up at night. Art, it would be great to hear from you, thinking about some of the really awful predators that you're catching online. Like, how do you think social media algorithms are driving those people to be able to do the things that you're exposing?
Well, first of all, thank you so much for having us. Fortunately for us, we live in an era that right now everything is internet. You're booking your tickets, you're shopping, everything happening online. So what me and my business partner, Ashton, what we do, we expose frauds and scams. We've been in this business for 10 years, and we saw the progression from 2016 when elderly people will get scammed by paying their taxes via gift cards, to see right now with AI, deepfake, that Elon Musk right now can FaceTime you and tell you, baby, I love you. Can you send me $5,000, please? We've seen progression. It got to the level that a lot of elderly people actually killing themselves. And it's happening when they're getting scammed. they don't want to talk about it. And that's a problem. Nobody want to talk about it. When you're a victim of online frauds, you keep it to yourself. And that's what scammers want. They want that you will not talk to your neighbors. You would not be like educated. And it's got to the point, we will go and chase bad guys. And, sometimes, mafia want to kill us or whatever, put like bounty on our head, because we're trying to expose and trying to bring this awareness that it is important. And you're going from teenagers who's dating online, sextortion scam, when you're saving teenagers exploring their bodies and sending the pictures, nudes, and then all of a sudden you need to pay me money or I'm gonna show these pictures to your classmates. And you go from sextortion scam to online technical support scam from fake virus. You open your computer and it says pop-up virus, call this number, and you call this number, and that's what scammers want. So to answer your question about online predators, the biggest problem is, that's what I'm trying to say, that people don't talk about it. Why in school, a teacher or principal will educate like, hey guys, if you start dating, making sure you know that person, making sure you see the person. If hot girl texted you out of nowhere, right? And you immediately oh my God, yeah, I want to talk to this girl. But that girl is a guy in Africa. That's who you're talking to. So it's, I'm sure my business partner can add a lot of things, but just please be careful. And if somebody's pressuring you, somebody's forcing you to do something immediately, think about it. If it's your sheriff calling you or whoever, now you can spoof the numbers that your president can call and gonna tell you you haven't paid your taxes or something happened to you. So it's stop, breathe, do your research, and talk to people around you. That's, do your own research.
Well, yes, to follow up with that, thank you so much for having us. Yeah, we're more operational than we are ideological. We spend a lot of time talking directly to these scammers and these victims. We think we've talked to scammers or victims every day for the last 10 years. So we come right in at the last minute when the damage has already been done, and we have to kind of work our way backwards. Okay, you lost all of this money and your life has been destroyed, or you've lost your family, you've lost your whatever it is, and kind of working backwards to okay, well, what got you here? It wasn't just one thing. It wasn't oh, I got a text and I lost all this money. Usually there's a chain reaction of, okay, I got a text of someone impersonating so-and-so, and then the social manipulation, down the line of urgency, as you said. And I really think there needs to be more accountability on these platforms too, as far as they're being impersonated. Usually these scams are started because someone is reaching out to somebody pretending to be somebody. And now that we've been able to build up a following too, people will pretend to be us. And so we've kind of made a name for ourselves as being the ones to kind of come in and help scam victims. But now scammers will impersonate us and contact people they know have been scammed, telling them they're going to help them. And then turns out that they're just trying to scam them again in the name of us who would normally try to help them, but they're just being scammed again. And why we can't talk to a platform like Facebook and say, this is a fake page. It's pretending to be us. It's stealing from people in our name, yet we can't do anything about it. When I file a report, it gets denied. What is that about? So the impersonation, I think there needs to be more accountability, especially with these tech support scams. They're always impersonating PayPal, Amazon. There's always some kind of big recognizable name that comes into play, and that's the trigger that starts this manipulation down the line that's really ruining lives. It's ruining financial lives, and people are taking their lives, breaking families apart. We've seen the end game play out as horribly as it possibly can, and it's usually so much more than financial.
It's also interesting to see that, speaking of Facebook, scammers can go and place ads on Facebook, and they put those little traps, like right now, investment, Bitcoin. Everybody want to wake up one morning and have $100,000 with one coin, right? The digital money. And scammers, that's what they do. They go Facebook, Instagram. You want to invest in something? You trust platforms, right? You go to Facebook I want to invest money and I want to trust this person, but I don't know why Facebook allowing you to put your own, whatever investments, whatever you want on the platform that I trusted, and all of a sudden I lose all my money. So accountability, it's a big thing. It's not happening. That's why education, public speaking, talking to your parents, keeping an eye of people that you love, it's so important. If somebody called you, if somebody texted you, don't click on the link, don't reply to those emails unless you call the bank. don't answer the phone and it's like it's your Bank of America calling you. No, it's not. It's a scammer calling you to get in your account. So it's a lot of time to stop, breathe, don't get scammed.
Well, I was just going to say, recent internal documents from Meta reveal that they require a minimum of 95% confidence that the ad being placed on Facebook is a scam before they will take it down. And I don't think that would be acceptable in any other industry. It is not good enough. When you talk about policy and even litigation in relation to scamming, for example, one of the ways you structure policy is thinking about who is the person, that the actor in this regime that has the most knowledge, that can do the most about this problem. And relying on individuals to take responsibility for their own safety in a world in which it is virtually impossible for them to protect against these kinds of scams is not good enough, right? So I think we need a bit of everything. Like, we need the operationalists who aren't ideologues. We need people who will sue companies, fine. We also need news media revealing these problems, and people who are prepared to speak out about them, so that you can have this chain of harms being surfaced that can then be acted on, because it's not a mystery as to how you could address these problems from a policy perspective, but what is a challenge is getting policymakers and legislators to act.
Thank you. I'm just going to add one more thing quickly, which I think was to say that it's recently been out in the open that Facebook is making 20% of its revenue from fraud as well. So the fact that they have like this 95% accuracy need before they take things down is no coincidence. They're like happily making quite a lot of money from exactly the scams that you're uncovering. Ashley?
I think that's the issue too, because when I heard you guys speak, obviously education is important, but it sounds like so much of this could be fixed with the platforms doing something. And when you said that you guys are also being impersonated and they do nothing, it really shows a pathology about these platforms, that they believe you do not own the rights to yourself. They have those rights. We're going to distribute it. We're going to let other people have it. And this is why we really need to hone in on making it a strict liability issue for AI impersonation, for impersonation generally. You should own yourself. You should own yourself. And the platforms should take this seriously. They are the ones who bear all of this responsibility, and nobody's doing anything about it. They're profiting off of your likeness, over people killing themselves, over this mental health crisis, over fraud running rampant. And at what point do we say enough is enough? At what point do we turn the faucet off and say we're not going to allow these platforms to do this in our countries, in our communities? How many more scams have to happen? How many more people have to be impersonated before we say enough is enough?
Thanks so much, Ashley. And I guess a question for all of you: where are you seeing regulation that is starting to do some of that is working? Like, where can we look to for hope? Lizzie, over to you.
Can I just start, as the country that's introduced a social media ban for under 16s, I think it's important to raise this and discuss it, because it was extremely controversial in Australia, the idea that you would kick a whole section of society off social media. And the regime was brought in very quickly. We're starting to see some of the operational challenges with implementation, including how do you define what a social media platform is? How do you make sure that age assurance is occurring in a way that people can have confidence in? What are the potential risks associated with it? But I think it's really important to raise this as a policy solution that's put forward by some in the context of the discussion we just had, because the harm experienced across social media, it's certainly experienced by young people, there's no doubt about it. What that looks like and how you fit it into the context of the many challenges that young people now face in their lives is another question. But I think we could do more to make these spaces safer in a variety of ways. But it is not just young people who are experiencing this. Particularly older people tend to be overrepresented as victims of scams, and they are largely left out of the conversation, which is its own problem. But also parents of young people, I think, who are now involved in framing this legislation, and I think see how young people use social media through the lens of their own experience of using it, which is not always how young people experience it. So I think if you talk to young people, a lot of them like the idea of being kicked off. They don't love these spaces either. But a lot of them also use these platforms for all sorts of good and encouraging reasons. And there's a bunch of research being done in Australia. There's a bunch of civil society organisations talking to young people about it, and the research is really interesting. It's quite charming how young people use the internet. There feels to me like some really positive ways in which social media can improve their lives. And that is not to deny the harms, but it is to say that we need to think about what all of these policies. I advocate for taking a human rights approach. Who's going to be impacted negatively in terms of their rights, and what are we doing about it? You know, is it a necessary and proportionate intervention in those circumstances, and what can we do to ameliorate harms of a particular policy decision? So I would say for people interested and who find the idea of a ban for young people appealing, to stop and consider some of those issues and look at alternatives. The other bit of policy being progressed through Australia is a Children's Online Privacy Code that will be targeting any online service that might be used by a child, which is obviously much more expansive than social media, and framing the kinds of obligations those companies have. And I think there's much greater scope, thinking about this through the lens of privacy, to introduce quite impactful reforms on some of the business models, and also encourage and incentivize a more protective and safe environment for young people, but also hopefully for everybody who's using these spaces.
Thanks. And Deirdre, it would be great to hear if you've got any thoughts on kind of rules and regulations that can help really safeguard the future of journalism and media in this space.
Yeah, so I suppose in media generally, we would not promote the idea of censorship, and that would probably extend, in fairness, to a ban for under 16s, although that is something that's very much under consideration in Ireland at the moment. But I think for all of the reasons that you mentioned, Lizzie, it becomes very difficult to enforce. I think we really need to look to our own governments, and we need to look to Europe in our case. There is an issue with a lot of the regulation coming out of Europe, which is complex and fraught with the law of unintended consequences. So some of the effects of regulation in Europe have had a negative effect on media, which really doesn't need to have, to be muzzled or restricted or prevented from, trying to sustain its business at the moment. So Europe really needs to have a long think about how it can simplify the regulations it is asking the different states to put in place, and how it can do that with a few clear goals in mind, and such as, obviously from our point of view, the sustainability of media, which is imperative to ensuring that social media culture doesn't take over.
Yeah, I just want to add one thing about regulations. We live in Los Angeles, California. A lot of things, when person gets scammed, elderly person, young person, doesn't matter, right? Money from your bank account has to move to scammers' hands. How does it get moved? Bitcoin ATMs. In America, you go at every single gas station, there is Bitcoin ATM, which is mind-blowing to me. Person victim will put $500,000, $1 million, will come to Bitcoin ATM at gas station, and old saving account dumped in this Bitcoin ATM machine, right? So it's one of those things that next week we're going to be in Capitol Hill and we'll be public speaking about laws, regulations, legislations, how these, if there is a Bitcoin and if there is all this cryptocurrency, everything is good. Put it in a bank, leave it something that under surveillance, like under protection. It's just getting so abused that when person getting scammed, it's just like so easy. So that's why, accountability. And
I don't have kids, so maybe I can't speak to this, but I was a kid with a strict upbringing, and I feel like the fastest way to get me to want to do something is to tell me I'm not allowed to do it. So that's why the underage bans worry me, because we do a lot of sting houses to catch child predators. We'll have decoys that go online and pretend to be children. I'd say 95% of the apps that these decoys are linking up with child predators online are on apps that have 18 and over restrictions. It's not that the kids are not supposed to be on these apps, it's that the kids are on these apps, and they will find a way around it. And that's what worries me. I think there needs to be platform accountability. And we're speaking to like Facebook having a 95% whatever thing. Well, what about that other 5%? They're still taking the money for those ads. And it's not just Facebook, it's Google ads. You can no longer Google a customer support number for anything, because the first 3 results are ads, and usually they're scammers of someone getting you a toll-free number to impersonate Amazon. So don't Google the number to Bank of America, call the number on the back of your debit card. There needs to be some accountability, and if it's Facebook still making 20% of its revenue on scam ads, well, they're still keeping the revenue, right? So there needs to be some kind of accountability to the platform for allowing this to exist, not just putting all the blame on the person using it, saying, well, you're under 18, you weren't supposed to be here, in my opinion.
I just wanted to build on that really quick with the underage ban, because the issue with the underage ban is it gives you the false notion that at some point you will be old enough and healthy enough to use these platforms. And I think it ignores the ontological issue that we're creating within all of humankind. And especially, I'm in America. Social media has destroyed our country and our interpersonal relationships, the way in which we communicate with each other, the way in which we engage, if you want to call it that, with democracy. And so the underage bans give this notion that at some point you can finally use it, just like grabbing a beer. You'll be old enough to get a Twitter account, and they'll look forward to that. And that is really dangerous, because I don't know that any of us should have it. I don't know that there's an age in which it's healthy.
Yeah, thanks, Ashley. I guess just to use my role as moderator in a way I'm not supposed to. But one thing that I see exciting about the conversation around bans is that for the first time in a really long time, there is a huge amount of energy from both the public and politicians to really do something about big tech. And I think you've seen from what everyone has shared on this panel that this very blunt instrument of an age ban is not going to fix actually any of the harms that have been spoken about here. But I still see some hope and something really positive in taking really decisive action about at least one group of people who are harmed. And so I wonder, with that in mind, with this energy and desire and motivation coming across the world, so many jurisdictions from the UK, where I'm from, Australia, France, Spain, many others, like how can we harness that? What if you had a magic wand and there was like one piece of regulation that you could bring in, what would that look like?
I think, and it's kind of a surprise that it hasn't happened before now, but I think the imposition of an international agency, with a set of codified standards, should be introduced to regulate both social media and AI. The nearest example is probably the International Atomic Energy Agency, and there are parallels to be drawn between the subject matter, I suppose, in each case. So you're talking about very, very high stakes and very, very, very high risks in each case. So I think, the codification of standards and the imposition of audits by an international agency is something we should be starting to work on now.
I'm going to misuse my position as a panelist to reject the question and reframe it slightly. So I think there's no single policy solution, as I'm sure everyone's aware, and I don't think that was implied by the question. But I think there are lots of opportunities. So, I mean, from where I'm sitting, privacy reform is imperative. Personal information is what powers these social media companies. They have used it to refine their advertising approach and to make sure that they can sell that for the most money possible and centralize their economic power as a provider of that service. So limiting the access to personal information is critical and needs to be and it is a rights respecting way in which you can regulate platforms. So I think that's something everyone should aspire to. Californians have more privacy rights than Australians, for example, and probably lots of other countries in the world. So California has some interesting laws that we can look to, including regulating data brokers, for example, as well as social media platforms, and imposing statutory damages, which is a litigation lawyer I really love. Anyway, that's my own personal interest. There are lots of other ways in which I think we could tackle some of the challenges that we've talked about today. So any kind of regulation that imposes transparency on the business model, I think is very important. So that can be transparency over algorithms, it can be ad libraries, it can be mandating greater transparency around the views that are seen by those ads, so to minimize the kind of scam adverts that we see, but also the way in which the advertising ecosystem is very opaque and social media companies control a huge part of it. So giving people who are publishers of ads the capacity to see how that works, I think can improve the quality of the online space, because some of the bad behavior that's facilitated by that opacity starts to fall away. So I think prioritizing that kind of transparency, not necessarily prioritizing taking down of content. So I agree with Ashley's point earlier. I mean, Australia also was one of the first countries to have an online safety regime. It was largely framed around taking down content, and that is now no longer useful. It does not address the systemic problems that we now see. It is ineffective except in very limited circumstances. And having a complaints regime, while very important, is insufficient for tackling the problems that we see. So those kinds of structural interventions are critically important. I'm not for getting rid of online safety regimes or complaints and the like, or even takedown notices necessarily. But I think we need to move beyond that kind of framing towards structural interventions that can have a greater impact.
I've gone back and forth on whether we should have some sort of international oversight similar to nuclear or atomic energy. But my concern with that is that, especially in the United States, so much of this is hidden under the guise of national security or international security. And right now they hide behind IP laws and proprietary information. And, well, Mark Zuckerberg can't disclose it because Jeff Bezos will get it. And so while an international oversight sounds good, I also hope that we can structure things in a way that this information is still not only disclosed behind closed doors under the guise of national security, because this is of public interest. The public does deserve to know what algorithm they're building off of our human collective consciousness. That's our right. They built this product off of us, and we have a right to know about it. So whatever we do, it's very important that this isn't hidden under the guise of we can't disclose it because China will beat us in this AI race or whatever it is. We have to have full transparency for those who are affected.
Very true. And also, again, with developing ChatGPT, with AI, we scam baiters, right? We do this for a living. We baiting these scammers. Now it's got so hard to spot it, because when you back in the days, you receive an email, you won $10 million, but you have to pay taxes in advance, and you're going to claim a lottery scam, right? You read the email and you see how broken English email is, and you're like, yeah, it's a scam. Now scammers is ChatGPT. You receive email that you won $10 million and everything is proper, and you cannot identify. How many times we will see that there is, especially right now with investment scam, when people want to make money online, keep talking about Bitcoin. We scam baiters, and I was like, Ash, this looks so real. He was like, I know, if I would not be in this industry, I will fall for this. So again, identifying, educating, awareness, it's so important, and especially what's happening online nowadays with AI.
One of the stories we just covered recently on our show was a man out of Canada, but he lost $600,000 in a crypto investment scam, and it's very involved. He got his family involved, his friends involved, but it all looped back to a Facebook ad. He got a Facebook ad for investment advice, and it was like, hey, it was sort of very small. It was like, oh, you invest $100, we'll triple it by the end of the month or whatever. And he lost everything. He's remortgaged his house at like a 18% interest rate. He's done. And it all came back to a Facebook ad. So I don't know what that is. I'm not a policymaker. That sounds like a friggin' nightmare, to be honest. But all we do is look at damage, and we come in at the end and we see this guy who's lost his friends, he's lost his family, he's lost his house, and he has nowhere to go. He has no one to talk to. He can't go to Facebook. They're not going to do anything. I wish there was some more accountability with these platforms, where if you're only required 95% certainty that it's real, well, then maybe you should be required to take the 5% of the revenue you're getting from ads and actually set it aside and give these victims a place that they can actually talk to, submit their cases. Maybe something like IC3 with that kind of intention, but something that's mandated within the platforms, that you have to hold this back, because if you only have to be 95% sure it's not real, well, then you got to take that other 5% and help the people that were duped because it wasn't real,
Thank you. I would also say that there is European regulation right now that the big tech oligarchy is really coming for, shoulder to shoulder with Trump. And I think the fact that that is so much in their vision demonstrates that it could be quite effective and has started to be quite effective. I can see there's lots and lots of questions in the room. I know you had one first.
Thank you very much. You just diffused my main question, which was not my first question, but I was astounded that exactly what Lizzie was describing is what the Digital Services Act does in her most recent turn. In her first turn, what she described about that we need to have legislation to defend democracy, not just consumer interest, to make sure that companies don't have so much power and individuals don't have so much power. That's the Digital Markets Act. So the EU has implemented laws to address exactly these harms, and Donald Trump has declared war on the EU as a consequence. And this is huge. This is geopolitical. This is geoeconomic. And we are fighting. And indeed, I thought that Australia also had some transparency laws, because I've been to some of these sort of closed-door meetings about this, and a lot of countries are starting to put these transparency laws in place. So one of the things I think we all have to do is inform democratic people, is recognize what these wars are being fought about and that there are solutions, and absolutely, exactly as you're describing, it's a great panel. Sorry, I'm complaining, but it was a great panel. So that actually, so since you diffused my question, I will come back to the actual, the previous intended question, which you sort of said at the beginning, actually, it's the moderator, and this wasn't contradicted, that it's just the action of a handful of people. But coming back to antitrust theory, that if something grows better with a network, then you often get these kinds of things. And so what the original antitrust theory did, which was American, was say, some things are called utilities, and you have to govern them harder. They just don't have the same rights as other companies. They have more privileges because they will be monopolies and they will get more money, but they have more riding by the government. The government is the only reason that every person in the most remote place has a telephone number, right? Because they don't make money off of that, but that was the deal. You get this monopoly, but you have to do certain kinds of things. So why aren't we seeing this kind of utility style, a call for saying like, yeah, I don't think it is just a few people being evil. I think that the people are being facilitated to be evil by the nature of the networks. So I don't see why there's not a call for like utility-like style regulation.
Capital, that's it. The profits these companies, our entire stock market is propped up on this. They don't want any oversight. And when the people who own the capital are closer than our members of Congress at the inauguration, and they have less transparency, who was within earshot of Donald Trump at our inauguration? It wasn't our representatives. It was those people who don't want to be regulated. And so that's why this isn't going to work as long as this infiltration is there, because it impacts them, and they have the presidency here, and they get to go over to the new, whatever he's building, his new big, beautiful ballroom, and say, we don't want this. And he says, okay, thank you.
And if there was ever an image for why we need to do anti-monopoly work, I think that image is exactly it, right? When people and companies get that powerful, we end up here.
So you're right that there was transparency legislation proposed in Australia. It was actually proposed twice under the last administration and withdrawn twice. Which is very frustrating. It was attached to a regime of takedown notices for content that, that some had described as a censorship regime. Shall I put it in the passive? But the point is that caused a lot of controversy. So I think there's utility in hiving them off, but it was a disappointing failure, I think, for a variety of perhaps good, but mostly bad reasons. The other concept that is floating around, at least in Australia, which is sort of similar to what you're describing, is a licensing regime. I mean, for kind of platforms to do this work. So what would be the requirements of a licensing regime? Compliance or submission to the jurisdiction on various issues, probably some kind of payment or also pooling resources for some kind of complaints regime or accountability regime, which I think would be potentially useful. That was recommended as a result of a review of our online safety regime as well. That was one of the recommendations put forward. So compliance with, for example, a digital duty of care. You can see how other things might come into the fold with a licensing regime, but essentially to treat them like broadcasters in the same way that you regulate broadcasters with a licensing regime. I think there's potential challenges with that, but I don't think it's a terrible idea. And I think it's worth fleshing out in the various ways in which it can have impact on public policy, from safety to media regulation to tax. There's lots of different ways you could have a discussion about policy imposed on these companies. There is a geopolitical issue, which is we're a small, medium-sized power, and we've got a really big bully neighbour across the Pacific who is coming down on a ton of bricks on much bigger people than us. However, I think even the Canadian Prime Minister's recent speech, Davos gives you a different kind of flavour of what might be possible for even middle-sized powers, and that maybe there's scope for countries to rethink how they approach this. But that is the big gorilla in the room, I think, that this has significant trade implications, significant concerns for many small countries that are seeking to solve the problems for themselves, because also they're under pressure from their own electorates to do so.
One big question and two additional statements. One is on the level of personal scammers. What I tell everyone, friends and family, is if it's too good to be true, it's not true. That's the bottom line. They tell you you're going to get double your income in 3 months or a month. Too good to be true, it's not true. Beware of that. The second thing is, I was scammed in buying a product off a Facebook ad. It was $20 or $30. It was nothing. But I immediately got a call from a Visa company. Visa card noticed it. They called me immediately, canceled my card, canceled the charge, and this is a mechanism that might be valuable to use in the whole scamming scheme is getting the credit card companies involved, because eventually they lose a lot of money also. And the big question that I want to ask is one that I think concerns all of us in democracies and wasn't really addressed in the panel, is what about elections and all the election fraud and the AI fraud now? And once the damage is out there, it's almost impossible to correct. Some guy's candidate picture is put out there saying something horrible. There's no recourse for that once it happens. How are we going to protect our elections?
Steal the mic as a moderator again. So in my previous role, I led investigations at Global Witness, looking exactly at this, at the role that big tech was having in elections. And we found across the last German election, the last 2 Romanian elections, and the last Polish election, that TikTok's algorithms in particular were really driving people to the far right, much, much more than we had expected to. And as a result of the evidence of these very small investigations that we were able to do in less than a week, we've submitted complaints under the Digital Services Act that are now being reviewed. So I think that's really key. Like, there are so many important elections happening again this year, and while these platforms continue, if they are, like, more broadly pushing people in particular directions, that has a really significant, or could have a really significant impact on the outcome. So I would really look to the European Commission and hope that it can make findings on these types of investigations as quickly as possible, and really demonstrate that it has teeth, recognizing how challenging that is to do that with the weight of the US government shoulder to shoulder with big tech coming against it.
Just want to share an anecdote that goes with what you said. If it is too good to be true, probably is. But one of our team members, her name is Chappie, she got into this, she's a kind of a white hat hacker and does a lot of scam baiting and goes after these guys from the inside. She got into this because her best friend was looped into one of these scams. She didn't know about it because the scammer was telling her not to tell anybody. But she was being preyed upon by what we call a refund scam. And she found her body. She went to her house and had found she had taken her life like 30 minutes before. And then when they went through her phone and saw all the conversations with the scammer, they saw that the scammer had found out she had early onset dementia and was using it against her by saying, if you tell anyone about this, they're going to throw you in the loony bin, so you better keep quiet. Otherwise, you're going to lose everything. And so I don't know how to fix elections, but that's an example of how there's no recourse for that either. I can't go to her and say, it was too good to be true, you shouldn't have done it. That's why our power is in awareness and showing people how these things happen, showing where the accountability needs to land. It was started by a imposter scam. I don't know specifically if it was PayPal or Amazon, but it's kind of how those scams start. And we deal with this more often than we would like to admit, where there is no recourse, and the damage isn't just financial. And if you were to see our inbox, you can't find the bottom, and it's heartbreaking. It's actually a very dark place to live. That's why we try to bring some humor to what we do. I don't know what the answer is, but we come in to so many of these stories where they were pressured to not tell anybody, and that had long-lasting effects far beyond just financial. And I wish we could tell everybody if it's too good to be true, it is. But it's not that simple.
Yeah, I absolutely love what you said. It's, I wish everybody will think like this. What really mind-blowing for me, to see how financial institutions like banks don't take any accountability, right? When it's time to bring money, they will take that money immediately. When a scam victim will go to the front desk, withdraw $100,000, there is not a single question asked. Why are you taking your life-saving account? What's happening? Like, talk to us. They will allow to take the money. The elderly person will get scammed, take her life, and when the family comes and like, why did you not stop my grandmother withdrawing her life-saving? Fraud department, useless. They have all these obligations just to do like check, check, check. You're supposed to have fraud department, but when you contact fraud department, there is nothing to be done. 48 hours, 12 hours, like money is already gone. So I don't know, public awareness. This is all we can do. Me talking to you guys, you talking to your people that you love, like the country where I came from, which is Belarus. Elderly people, it's like when you watch movie about Italian mafia. Grandfather is everything, right? You can have any power in the world, but when somebody tell you something, and especially your grandfather or grandmother, you have trust, you have respect, and this is like we have to just watch out for our folks. That's all we can do, and especially us, young generation. I think this is our responsibility. Like when we get a new employee coming to our company, 20 years old, I don't even understand. Like they so digitally, they know everything on the platform. Like he's teaching me what to do, and I was like, wow. And this is what we need to do to our parents, our people. We just have to pass that knowledge. That's all I can say.
I cannot speak to the scams, but I can speak to your part of the question about democracies, especially since we've been so impacted in the United States, and obviously Europe has been impacted as well. But what blows my mind is that after Cambridge Analytica, we didn't do anything. In fact, we allowed something to be grown that was much worse on Twitter and X. And we really, maybe there's a new course of action we can take in terms of how this impacts the process of democracy in general, because you have these platforms who have these massive behavioral inference models, and they can see exactly what the pressure points are for each election, and they have that data. And we should have that data as well if they do. So they're, in my view, the best thing we can do is transparency, because right now there's none, and they're giving this algorithm or this data or this behavioral inference data to this politician, and they're influencing elections. But if it's open source, we can see everything. It will solve a lot of problems in a way that I think they're not going to be able to get around.
And we also know from the 6th insurrection that at that point, Meta implemented break the glass measures, where it stopped really heavily boosting content that was likely to, push people out into violence. So we know that they are able to do that very, very quickly if they want to, but it's evidently like a financial choice that they're not doing it ahead of more elections or at other key points. The organisers of this event wanted to put forward the idea of a council on setting rules and regulations, and I was just interested to hear from the panel and from the audience like what you think about that idea, and if it was to go forward, who you think should be on it, how that should be created. If anyone has thoughts. Oh, we can go to more questions is also great. Okay.
So I'm really glad you asked this question, and I'm going to be very direct. I've been involved with this since they brought me in. I'm just one of the experts. I'm a panelist on another panel. I'm sorry, I probably should say I'm Joanna Bryson. I'm at the Hardy School of Governance, and I'm working very hard on digital governance. So on the one hand, I agree. In fact, I've written a paper defending this idea of it being like nukes. But on the other hand, that involves somebody getting to the point where they realize they need to give up power in order to get something back that's more important, like stability, long-term sustainability. And I think here it's not actually a country; it's the tech people that we have to reach out to and get them to understand that. But looking at how concentrated things are right now, I'm just afraid that any single panel would get regulatory capture. And so I'm a little worried that this organization, who I do not understand, whoever runs World Forum, that they're a little too transhumanist and they're a little too trusting in a single centralized authority. I don't know where that comes from. I think we need to work on a bunch of treaties, and we have to have agile, even more agile than the EU, that people can come in, but if they decide they don't like the rule of law, then they are out. And so we have benefits and responsibilities flowing to people that are willing to take them. I think we need something more decentralized like that.
I'm guessing that everybody in this room agrees that this stuff is very potentially dangerous or actually dangerous and needs governance and regulation and accountability. And my guess is everybody would agree that Section 230 of the U.S. Telecommunications Act, which unleashed all of this initially, was a terrible mistake. But the challenge, at least for me, are these two issues. One is co-optation and the other is competition. Co-optation, as much as we all think we should have governance and accountability and panels and commissions and treaties, we've had total co-optation. That I'll just call him a murderous monster. Elon Musk basically took control of the last U.S. elections. The crypto industry took control of the last elections. And so basically the administration that is leading the United States has been completely co-opted by the two most toxic industries. And that's why you see all of these threats by J.D. Vance and others against Europe. So people elsewhere can say, well, here's what it should happen and be right. But if there's not the authority to make it happen, if Europe isn't strategically independent enough to stand up against this kind of pressure, even in an area as existential as this, it creates a really big problem. I don't have an answer to that, but I just think that has to be part of the conversation. Otherwise, it's like there's this actual power structure, and then nice people sitting in hotels are saying we should have a treaty and we should have a panel, and there's just a massive mismatch between the two. And the second is the issue of competition, because as much as I support regulation and governance, Europe has regulated and governed itself in many ways out of relevance, at least in the nature of this power and the technology and the companies. So it's really a two-horse race at this point between the United States and China. And there were many of us, myself included, who hoped that Europe could have become a governance and regulatory superpower, but that seems less likely by the day. So I'd love to get your responses and reflections on these ideas.
Well, it would be difficult to address the number of claims within that, but I do have to say it is incredibly dangerous to say that Section 230 was a mistake in the United States. Section 230 immunity is what provides us free speech on the internet. The issue with Section 230 is the broad application of Section 230, and some of these people absolutely should not have Section 230 immunity. But to get rid of Section 230 would mean that free speech on the internet as we know it is dead. So I do have to address that, because I do hear a lot of murmuring about Section 230 that is inaccurate and incredibly consequential. As it relates to co-opting, this, at least in the United States, this has been the case for a long time, especially since Buckley v. Vallejo, when we decided that corporations were political minorities of sorts and that money was protected speech. That is our law in the United States. So I think there's a variety of things that we could do in terms of campaign finance. I think that's kind of what you're getting at, but money cannot be speech. It should not be speech, because then by definition, a lot of people have a lot more free speech than others. But I'm not sure what the question is in terms of like if a treaty will help or competition in China. I'm not sure how Mark Zuckerberg allowing scams online or any social media platform, whether it's X or Facebook, allowing algorithms on their platforms to manipulate the general public will put us behind China. I have never understood that step from a national security or world security standpoint. I understand that we do need certain AI advances, especially when it comes to coding and this output. It's much faster than us at output, which can be really beneficial from a national security standpoint. But I have no idea how applying that to the general public puts us above China, and that we need to abuse our population to be above China. And if that's the cost, then what are we doing?
Thank you very much. Excellent panel. My name is Mark Rotenberg. I have the distinction of being involved in writing 230, regretting it, and then also bringing the cases against Facebook and Google, which established the FTC's. Okay, so Section 230 is a broad immunity provision that was adopted in the Communications Decency Act of 1996. And at the time, what we were trying to do was to clarify inconsistent case law regarding intermediary, you say platforms, but I actually don't like that word, and one of my comments is to avoid using that word, but companies that were publishing the information of others. And some courts said you should be responsible when you republish someone else's information, and other courts said no, you should not be responsible when you republish. And this is, of course, a long time ago, and there are about 90 people on the internet, and we said, let's keep things simple. We'll just say you're not responsible for republishing the information of others. And what became clear very quickly is that the companies in the middle of these transactions, because they were immune from liability, and the liability was being pushed to the endpoints, which were the news organizations, by the way, these companies, Google and Facebook, were capturing the readership and revenue of traditional news organizations. And it's actually 230, I would say, that started the downward spiral of American journalism and journalism around the world. As I said, I have regrets. I worked very hard over the next decade and brought successful cases to the FTC regarding Google and Facebook. The problem was we couldn't get the FTC to enforce its orders. I actually sued the FTC to enforce its order against Google, and the judge was upset, largely agreeing with us on the merits, but saying she lacked the competence to reverse what the agency had done. And it wasn't actually till Cambridge Analytica that the FTC woke up and said, well, I guess now we have to do something. Well, long and short, if you're looking to the FTC today for consumer protection, I suggest you look elsewhere. There's a lot of work ahead, but I wanted to make a couple comments because what I heard I just thought was a wonderful discussion. And to Lizzie's point, I mean, Australia is leading in many of these domains. And my view is that trying to keep kids under 16 off of social media, which is not the same thing, by the way, as saying off the internet. I'm all in favor of kids going online as long as they're not required to provide personal information. If they can establish that they're 13, if they're at an age-appropriate site, that's fine. Leave them alone. It's like a library. It's a good experience. The problem begins with the collection of personal data. So the real point of these laws is not like to keep kids away from the internet or social media. It's to hold the companies accountable for allowing them to go online and to be exploited through their business model. So we keep the focus on the companies. Ashley said something very interesting also, and I absolutely agree that transparency is one of the keys, that we need to get these companies to publish the algorithms. And several state laws, including Florida and Texas, by the way, have already mandated this. But they've been challenged by the companies on First Amendment grounds because the companies say, well, this is compelled speech. And Deidre, this is where the news organizations come in, because we can't let the news organizations get dragged in again to defending these internet companies. It's Stockholm Syndrome. And you have to say, yes, if you're going to manipulate the personal data of people, make it public and make it transparent so people can make informed decisions. And final point, we're going to be having a big conversation this afternoon about the World Council on AI and social media, and I hope many of you will join us. I mean, it's a very timely discussion. We have wonderful people here for the conversation, and I hope you'll all be a part of it. So thank you.